There is some decorum that Canadians have achieved, even in struggles like this. But the misrepresentation of information can stagger you sometimes.
Today, there's no distinction on where a person is buried, meaning all peoples are buried in cemeteries or placed in crypts, regardless of their color or nationality. But once upon a time, we were buried in cemeteries of our own.
My name is Les McKinnon. When I was in grade 6, I had written a story about early pioneers in Grey County. And I told with some pride that Irish and Scottish settlers were the first non-native settlers in Grey County. It took me a good portion of the rest of my life up till now to realize that was bogus, that it was a lie of a sort, but I took every available document, every book that I could find, and seemingly they all had this same, almost verbatim, that Irish and Scottish settlers were the first non-native settlers in Grey County. But then stories were told to me about some of those early Scottish families that moved into southern Grey, particularly around Priceville, and how some of them had written letters back home to relatives in Scotland and described the dark people that they met here when they arrived.
My name's Carolyn Smarts, and I'm an archaeologist. Just a few miles west of here is the area of Priceville, which we know to have been a Black community in about 1835. In the early 1830s, maybe even the late 1820s, there was a settlement of Black families that moved up here, probably from the Queensbush area in Wellesley Township, the Waterloo Township, the Brantford area, probably in that area. They moved up to a part of southern Ontario along Highway 4, just west of Flesherton, on what was to become the Old Durham Road. And in fact, the local oral history says that some of them were veterans of the War of 1812 who had fought on the side of the Crown, the War of 1812, and had been given land, or been told they were going to be given land that was actually not ever granted.
My name is Stuart Muir, and I live at a suburb of Owen Sound, Six Corners. Well, it'd just be hearsay, you know. Someone tells the other person. You hear it in a community. You know how things go. And you'd hear about this, and you'd hear about Colonel Price. I didn't know. I thought Colonel Price was a white man for a long time, and it turned out he wasn't. He was a colored guy. And I knew that Colonel Price, I'd been told. I didn't know. I was told that Colonel Price was instrumental in bringing quite a few of the colored people up to the Priceville area.
Priceville is not mentioned. The settlers of the Old Durham Road are not mentioned in the very few books on general Black history in Canada.
There is a overriding conspiracy, a non-conspiracy maybe, of silence in the community where people just don't talk about it. And that's the way they were trained. Don't talk. If you don't say it, it doesn't exist. And a lot of them were hushed up when they were kids. And for me, I've been difficult to shut up all my life.
Oh, I'm Helen Miller, and I live in Collingwood.
And I'm Alan Miller. I live in Collingwood.
Oh, go ahead, Dana, because I don't remember half of it.
My great-grandfather, Green, he was born out there in Priceville. And through the relations, they said that he was buried there. I don't know if my father was born out there or not. Everything was so secret. Like, it's hard to get anything out of our parent, because they were still in that hide and stage, and they never said too much anything. So you more or less had to pick and pick and pick, find little things out.
My name is Elise Harding Davis. I'm the curator administrator of the North American Black Historical Museum. I'm a seventh generation Canadian. Parts of my family have been here since 1798. We came to Canada to embrace a type of freedom that was denied us throughout the whole of North America. Oftentimes we weren't necessarily appreciated. We weren't necessarily wanted. But by keeping a low profile, by keeping our own counsel, actually being secretive in the way we conducted ourselves, we were able to survive. And that stood us very well. We were so able to blend into the mainstream, people forgot we existed. Many people are told blacks only arrived here in the last 1 or 2 generations, but we've been here for a solid 200-300 years, and we are a part of what Canada stands for.
The people along the old Durham Road were there for probably 20 to 30 years, and then there was a diminution in the population, probably because local white settlers were forcing them out.
I do think that there was what story I did hear, that it was kind of mean that they just walk in and take all the head and get out of here. Now, that's not too fair in a way, I wouldn't think.
The whites got deeds and that to the land and everything, which we didn't get. So they just moved in and kept pushing them back.
And that problem, that tension between the black and white community continued right through the 1930s in that area till almost everyone who had been part of the Priceville settlement had gone.
I have nothing in my memory that would indicate that they would not be treated well, that they would not be treated just the same as your next door neighbor. There were people in the community. That's my recollection. That is the way my own people would look on them.
Well, they'd just be pushed off, and where you go out of here, that was all there was to it. They didn't have no deeds, no nothing, and that'd be it. It was, I've often heard some of the old timers say it was a shame that they were used the way they were. Now that's all I can tell you.
A lot of the families settled on land that was uncharted, that was unassigned. They squatted. They didn't own their land. And even though they tried to purchase it later, the land had already been divided and allocated. And because probably they were black, largely, the land agents were very unsympathetic to their situation. And even though they had cleared large amounts of their land, they had built homes, in many, many cases, African Canadian settlers were forced off their land.
I don't think they thought that we were human. I think this was the whole thing. Because why could the other people come in and get all this and we got nothing?
There's also some very sad oral history in this area about people actually being forced through violence to leave their homes. And that happened at Priceville. Communities emptied out. Areas where there had been black settlement eventually had smaller communities or no community at all, like it did at Priceville. Consequently, the cemetery is left behind. So you have a black cemetery, a black history of an area that is the only example of that, the only sign of that community's existence is the cemetery that's remaining.
My name is Joyce Grimes. I moved to the Old Durham Road, River Out Tree, Priceville, when I was 9 years old in 1940 with my mother, who subsequently married Billy Reed. And I lived there for several years and worked on the farm with my stepfather. I went to school at the Darky Schoolhouse, they called it then, on the Old Durham Road. And one day while we were working on the farm, I asked my stepfather why that corner of the field was fenced off. And he said, well, it was a black cemetery. And I said, well, what happened to the tombstones, or was there any?
My recollection of that cemetery is that it was just a field, part of the farm. They had cattle, sheep pasturing on it. It was just a pasture field. And it was later on, I don't remember when Bill Reed plowed it up, maybe put some potatoes on it.
We raised very good potatoes on that particular piece of land. They were excellent. They lasted well through the winter. They were good, big potatoes. We never had to buy any.
This Reed man was like I don't know what you'd call him. He didn't have any respect for anybody.
Bill, he was outgoing. He I doubt would be too sentimental about the people who were buried there. He wasn't just given to that sort of thing.
My name is June McCaughrean. I was born in this general area. Well, I remember my parents talking about the time when the cemetery was turned into a potato patch. Actually, I guess there was nothing the neighbors could do. I mean, that was on private land, and you can't go in and tell someone else what to do with his or her land.
We'd be looking for something. A block of wood was too big, and this was something flat. Just parts of stones or broken pieces, because we used one. It was convenient. We played ball over at the schoolyard, and we used one for home plate. Yeah, name was on too. Oh yeah, pitch it to Maggie. Yeah. Yeah, we used to say that. I think it was Margaret. I even remember of us playing ball over there a little bit, but it didn't lend itself to that because there were still, grave markings to some extent.
My father had heard about it, and they were upset. But what could they do? Because their word just wasn't heard upon. They couldn't fight. How could they fight when they were put down so much? You don't know what would happen to them, their families, or anything, because they would be desecrated as well.
Kind of a difficult thing to fathom, honestly. Cemeteries are supposed to be consecrated spaces. The remains of the people buried there are supposed to be hallowed. However, when you continue and you go back to the systemic and traditional thinking of people, desecrations can happen.
We had a group of interested volunteer citizens who felt that there was a need to address a gap in our local history. We had the founding meeting in my family home. The committee's work between November of 1989 and October of 1990 was focused on establishing that the cow pasture that was really a cemetery became public domain.
I had often thought there should be something done at the cemetery, and I was only too glad to join a committee to go ahead and see what we could do about restoring the cemetery there.
The committee set out to reclaim the cemetery as a cemetery, clean it up, beautify it if possible, and which is not easy because the ground over there is not all that great.
When our committee formed, one of the things that we had set for a priority was to try and locate descendants of those early Black pioneers who we believe to be buried in that cemetery.
My great-grandfather Green was buried out there, and we'd like to find out more of the history of the Green side of the family. So that's why we joined the committee, see what we could find out.
And I joined because of Mr. Handy, and I'd like to try and find out where he is related to me, because I understand that he is related.
We had been given information about an anonymous letter that had been written in 1952, suggesting that if there was to be a recovery of tombstones from that Darkey cemetery, they should look in the stone pile north of the school. And so our project was to remove the stone pile to see if it had been used as a place to hide broken tombstones.
Well, it was a very emotional day. There were quite a few of us there working, digging those stones by hand and throwing them into the truck.
Well, I actually found the first piece. I've worked around gravel all my life, and I recognized stone that's had human hands to it. And I saw a small piece that had obvious markings on the edge of it. Turned out to be the very edge piece and a small corner piece of the tombstone of a man named Chauncey Simmons, actually Chauncey's son, Christopher. And Christopher died of one of the many epidemics that went through the area and killed people indiscriminately, no matter what color they were. But the stone clearly identifies his parents' names on it. And so we have this magical connection where the book Broken Shackles talks specifically about Chauncey Simmons. It's a small leather-bound book that was published in 1889. I remember smiling a lot that day. I remember that piece spurred the group on.
Everyone was so excited that we had found a few stones with some names on.
We were very, very happy that, we had proof that there was someone there, And because they said there was nothing there, there's nothing there. And then when the 4 stones was found, it gave us hope.
The cemetery was dedicated in October of 1990 by Lincoln Alexander, who was the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario.
You on the committee, you have the foresight and the vision. I think that something like this is appropriate. I want to thank you. Your dedication, commitment,